My son-in-law sent me a text message at 11:42 on a Tuesday night. "Pack your things, old man. This is our house now. You're making my wife uncomfortable." I read it twice. Then I smiled. By the following Monday, they were living out of a storage unit. I'd transferred the deed, canceled every account with their names on it, and driven 12 hours north to start over. They didn't see any of it coming, but I had. Before I go any further, if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from. I read every one. My name is Bernard. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years as a structural engineer in Tucson, Arizona. I built bridges for a living, calculated load capacity, stress tolerance, the exact amount of weight a structure could bear before it failed. Turns out that skill carries over into family dynamics more than I ever expected. My daughter Cassie is 36. She was the kind of kid who made everything look effortless. Honor roll, debate team, full scholarship to University of Arizona. Her mother and I used to joke that she got all the best parts of both of us. Her mother passed from ovarian cancer when Cassie was 27. That was a hard year. We leaned on each other, Cassie and I. Or at least, I thought we did. She met Dylan at a work conference about 4 years ago. He was in pharmaceutical sales, the kind of guy who talks loudly in restaurants and leaves the table to take calls during dinner. First time she brought him home, he walked through my living room the way a contractor walks through a house he's about to flip, noting square footage, figuring angles. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I should have said something. They got married 14 months later. I paid for the wedding. $62,000 at a venue outside Sedona, which Dylan picked because, according to him, it photographed well for social media. I thought about that number for a long time afterward. $62,000. For photographs. The first year they had their own apartment in Phoenix. Then Dylan's company restructured, and he lost his position. Cassie called on a Sunday evening, voice careful, asking if they could stay with me temporarily, just until Dylan found something new. Of course, I said. Of course, that was 22 months ago. The first few months were manageable. Awkward the way any adjustment is awkward, but manageable. I cooked, Dylan watched television. I mowed the lawn, Dylan watched television. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. Dylan watched television and occasionally mentioned that he was in active conversations with several companies. Cassie worked long hours as a hospital administrator. She was tired when she got home. I understood that. What I had more trouble understanding was why tired apparently meant she couldn't see what I was seeing. Dylan started small. Casual comments about my habits, mostly aimed at Cassie but said loud enough for me to hear. "Your dad really needs to update his kitchen. These appliances are embarrassing." Or at dinner, "Is this the same casserole from Monday?" No offense, Bernard. He never said anything directly to me for the first 6 months. He used my daughter as a middleman, and she delivered his messages with apologetic eyes and explanations I didn't ask for. Then he got comfortable enough to drop the intermediary. "You know they make those pill organizers for guys your age," he mentioned one morning while I was reading at the kitchen table. "I take a blood pressure medication. 1 pill, once a day." I looked up at him, said nothing, went back to my paper. 2 weeks later, when I mentioned I was thinking about driving up to visit my brother in Flagstaff for a long weekend, Dylan made a face. "Long drives alone at your age," he said. "Is that really smart?" I'm 64. I drove across the country solo 4 times before his parents met each other. The cruelest thing about this kind of treatment is how hard it is to name in the moment. Each individual comment is small enough to dismiss. He didn't mean anything by it. He's stressed about work. He's just worried about you. That last one, that's the one Cassie used most often. "He's just worried about you, Dad." And because I loved her, because she looked tired and stretched thin and I didn't want to add to it, I let it go. Again and again and again. 6 months in, I met a woman named Irene at a community lecture series on Southwestern architecture. She was 61, a recently retired high school principal with a dry sense of humor and strong opinions about Frank Lloyd Wright that she was not shy about sharing. We started getting coffee after the lectures, then dinner, then Sundays at the Botanical Garden, which sounds very tame and is, in fact, wonderful. I mentioned Irene to Cassie carefully, testing the temperature. She seemed happy for me. Dylan made one of his faces but said nothing. I took that as fine. The problem started when I asked if I could have Irene over for dinner. Nothing elaborate, just the four of us, getting acquainted, a normal thing that normal families do. Dylan's response was immediate and physical. He pushed back from the table where he'd been sitting, stood up, crossed his arms. I'm not comfortable with that. She's a friend of mine. She's someone you've known for 3 months, and this is our home. He said it easily, like he'd been rehearsing. Our home. I looked at Cassie. She was looking at her hands. Cassie. My voice was steady. You have thoughts on this? She looked up. Dad, maybe just... Let's give it a little more time. Let us get to know her first before we're doing dinners. You knew Dylan for 6 weeks before you brought him here? That was different. Dylan's voice sharpened. She was introducing me to her father. You're trying to bring someone into our living space. The words landed with precision. Our living space. My living space. My mortgage payment. My name on every document that existed for this property. I stood up slowly, got my keys from the counter, and left for the evening. I spent 3 hours with Irene at a quiet restaurant downtown, told her what had happened, and let her talk me through it. She was calm about it, patient. She said I would know when I knew what to do. She was right. I knew that night. I came home around 9:30. The house was dim, the television on in the den. I went to my home office, a small room off the garage that Dylan had been asking me to convert into a proper gym space, and sat at my desk. I pulled up my email and found the name I was looking for. Meg Callahan, estate attorney, Tucson. I'd worked with her briefly on a property issue 5 years earlier. I sent her a message, Meg, need to schedule a consultation. Estate and property matters, some urgency. Available this week? She responded in the morning. Thursday, 2 o'clock. I'll bring the relevant files. What I hadn't told Dylan or Cassie, what I hadn't told anyone, was that the night Dylan first made a comment about assisted living, about 8 months into their stay, I'd already started putting things in order, not out of anger, out of engineering instinct. You calculate the load, you identify the stress points, you build in fail-safes before the weight exceeds the tolerance. Over 8 months of quiet appointments, I had done the following: reviewed and updated my living trust, confirmed sole ownership of the property in my name, consolidated my financial accounts under a single institution Dylan didn't know about, established a new savings account, separate, clean, transferred from the joint checking I'd foolishly allowed Cassie access to for household expenses, documented 22 months of utility payments, mortgage statements, grocery receipts, everything in a secure folder on an encrypted drive. Their names appeared on nothing that mattered. I'd made sure of that quietly, over time, without drama. The same day I emailed Meg, Dylan sent me the text. I'd gone out to the garage after dinner to do some light work on a woodworking project I'd been neglecting, an old roll-top desk I was restoring for my brother. There's something grounding about restoring furniture. You work with the original structure, find what's still solid, replace what's rotted past, saving. You don't rebuild from scratch if you don't have to, but you don't preserve rot just because it's familiar. My phone buzzed on the workbench. I picked it up. Pack your things, old man. This is our house now. You're making my wife uncomfortable. I sat on the shop stool for a while. The garage smelled like sawdust and linseed oil. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something across the alley. I read the message 3 more times. I thought about Cassie at 9 years old, the day I taught her to ride a bike in this same driveway. She fell twice and cried once and then got back on without being asked because she'd decided she was going to do it. Her mother watched from the porch steps and said, "She's yours, all right." I'd been so proud of that stubbornness then. I was less clear on where it had gone. I thought about the night her mother died, the 2 of us sitting in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes before either of us could move. Cassie held my hand. 27 years old, and she held my hand the way she had when she was small. I thought we'd built something in those years after, something that would hold. I set my phone down. I didn't respond to the text. I went back to the desk, worked until midnight, fit a new piece of poplar into a section the previous owner had patched incorrectly, took my time with the joints. By the time I locked up and went inside, I knew exactly what I was going to do and in what order. Thursday's meeting with Meg was 2 hours. She was efficient, thorough, and had the particular energy of someone who has heard every variation of family dysfunction and reached a point of pure professionalism about it. I walked her through the timeline. 22 months, 0 rent paid, 0 utilities contributed, 0 acknowledgement of the arrangement as anything other than permanent and expected. I slid the text message across her desk on my phone screen. She read it once, handed it back. "Legally, you're in a very clean position," she said. "Sole ownership, documented expenses, proper notice procedures. Do you want me to draft a formal pay or vacate? I want 30 days, market rate or vacate, and I want it served by a process server, not mailed. That's aggressive. That's fair." She drafted the notice. Rental market rate in Tucson for a 4-bedroom house in my zip code, $3,400 per month. I signed the authorization Thursday evening. Friday morning, I was up at 6, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and waited. Dylan came down at 8:15. He saw me, registered something careful in my expression, and started to speak. "About last night," he said. "The text. Cassie was upset about the Irene thing and no need." I took a sip of coffee. "You were clear. I'm working on it." "What does that mean?" "It means I have some things to take care of today." "You two have the house." I left him standing at the coffee maker with a confused look on his face. I drove to Meg's office to review the final paperwork, then to the bank to begin a separate process I'll explain in a moment, then to Irene's house for lunch. She made chicken tortilla soup, and we sat on her back patio talking about nothing important for 2 hours. It was the most peaceful afternoon I'd had in months. The process server delivered the pay or vacate notice the next afternoon, a Saturday, at 2 in the afternoon. I was at the botanical garden with Irene when my phone started ringing. Dylan. Cassie. Dylan again. 7 calls in 12 minutes. I looked at my phone on the bench beside me and made no move toward it. "Processed server?" Irene guessed. "Should be, yes." She handed me a bottle of water. "Do you want to go?" "Not yet." I answered on the 9th call. Dylan's voice came through loud enough that Irene, sitting a foot away, could hear every word. "What is this? What is this letter? You're trying to charge us rent? Market rate, $3,400 a month, which is actually $50 below comparable listings in the area. You can't do this. We live here. This is our home. My name is on the deed, Dylan. It has always been on the deed. Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the mortgage. Your name is not on any document associated with this property. This is my home, and you're welcome to stay in it at market rate." A brief silence. Then Cassie's voice, quieter, more controlled. "Dad, can we talk about this in person? My attorney's contact information is on the notice. If you'd like to discuss payment arrangements, that's the appropriate channel. Otherwise, you have 30 days. I ended the call. Over the next few days, I moved methodically. I'd already arranged a furnished rental near the U of A campus, a small 1-bedroom, 700 square feet, hardwood floors, good light in the mornings, $1,100 a month. I started moving my personal items in the evenings after they'd gone to bed. My files, my tools, my books, the furniture I'd doped myself over the years. I left the Pottery Barn couch Dylan had convinced Cassie to buy on the installment plan. Figured they could deal with that. The second part of the plan was more technical, but it was the part I'd been quietly preparing for the longest. When Dylan lost his job, Cassie had asked me to co-sign a personal loan to cover their car payment gap. $18,000 through a credit union. I did it 15 months ago. Around the same time, I'd established a separate savings account and begun the documentation process. I'd also consulted a financial advisor about what removing myself from that co-signature would require and under what circumstances. Estrangement qualified. Change in financial relationship qualified. Having a documented history of requests, accommodations in non-reciprocation, all of it qualified. I submitted the co-signer removal request to the credit union the same week as the rental notice. Standard process, they would reevaluate the primary borrower's creditworthiness. Without my income and credit score backing the loan, Dylan's debt-to-income ratio would fail their thresholds. He managed pharmaceutical software demos from home and, as best I could calculate from what Cassie occasionally mentioned, had been pulling in about $38,000 in consulting income that year. She made $71,000. Combined, before taxes, roughly $109,000. Their monthly fixed expenses, loan payments, car insurance, subscriptions, the credit cards I'd seen the statements from when they were left on the kitchen counter, came to approximately $4,200 a month before any rent. Add $3,400 for rent. The math didn't work. It had never worked. The only reason it had looked like it worked was me. A week after the process server visit, Cassie came to find me at the rental. I hadn't given her the address, but it's a small enough city and she knew my habits. She knocked on the door on a Wednesday evening. I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table and looked around at the smaller space, the stacked moving boxes, the roll-top desk reassembled in the corner. "You really left," she said. "I moved. There's a difference, Dad." Her voice was careful. "Dylan was wrong to send that text. I know that. He knows that. But what you're doing, the notice, the attorney, the co-signer thing, the credit union sent him a letter yesterday. That's a legal process I'm entitled to under the terms of the loan. You're trying to destroy us." I leaned back in my chair. "Cassie, I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about it before you answer." She looked at me. "If I had moved into your home, let's say I'd fallen on hard times and you'd taken me in, and after 2 years I was still there, still paying nothing, and I sent Dylan a text at midnight telling him to pack his things and get out because I decided it was my house. What would you have done?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I know what you would have done," I said. "You would have done exactly what I'm doing, because that's how I raised you." She was quiet for a long moment. "We can't afford rent and the loan payment both." "I know. So what are we supposed to do? Figure it out. The way people do when they're adults without a fallback." I softened my voice a fraction. "Cassie, I love you. I have always loved you. But I have been subsidizing a life that doesn't include basic respect for me, and I'm done with that." She left without much more said. I watched her car pull out of the parking lot. I held that feeling for a while, the particular grief of doing something right that still hurts. The credit union completed their review and sent Dylan a notice. The cosigner had been removed from account 7741. The loan balance of $14,300 was due in full within 15 days or subject to collections referral. I got a confirmation copy via email on a Thursday morning. Read it over coffee on my small porch. A good desert morning, dry and clear. Dylan called me 4 times that day. I answered the 4th. "You're ruining my credit," he said. "You're ruining your credit," I said, "by having borrowed money you couldn't repay without someone else's financial standing backing you up. This isn't right. Everything we built here." "You built nothing here, Dylan. That's the part I need you to understand, not to be cruel, just as a statement of fact. The structure you were living in belonged entirely to me. The moment I stepped back, there was nothing to stand on." He had nothing useful to say after that. I hung up first. They missed the 30-day deadline. I'd expected they might try for an extension, and they did. Cassie called Meg's office asking for 60 days. Meg relayed the request. I authorized 35. Not out of softness, but because I didn't want a protracted dispute and the house needed to be properly vacated before I could list it. Yes, I listed it. I'd been thinking about the listing for a while. The house had appreciated significantly since I bought it in 2009 for $230,000. Current market put it around $460. After mortgage payoff, I had about $90,000 left, and closing costs, I'd clear roughly $350,000. I didn't need to sell. I could have kept it as a rental income property. But there were 15 years of a specific life in those rooms, and I was done with that chapter. New city, new chapter. My brother had been asking me to come up to Flagstaff for years. I've been putting it off. I started calling Flagstaff real estate agents. Cassie and Dylan were out on a Friday. Meg confirmed receipt of the keys. Left on the kitchen counter, which seemed to be the standard approach among people who have nothing left to negotiate with. A property manager I'd hired confirmed the condition: significant carpet damage in the master bedroom and den. A hole punched in the drywall of the hallway. 3 broken window blinds. Angry departures always have a signature. I filed the insurance claim that evening. The property manager coordinated the repairs. Photographers came 2 weeks later. The listing went live on a Tuesday morning. I was in Flagstaff by the time the first offer came in. My brother had loaned me the spare bedroom until I found a place, and we'd been spending evenings on his porch playing cards and talking the way we hadn't in 10 years. The offer was $455,000, cash buyers, a couple relocating from California, clean clothes, 30-day escrow. I accepted it by noon. That same week, Dylan posted something online. I didn't see it directly. A former colleague of mine forwarded it to me. Dylan had written a long post about toxic parents and financial manipulation and how some people weaponize generosity as control. He didn't use my name. He didn't need to. The post got about 200 reactions. My colleague, who is not one for social media and had clearly gone looking to find it, also sent me a follow-up message. I left a comment. Several people who know you did. It's not going the way he hoped. I sent her a thank you and closed the app. Irene and I had dinner at a place near the Flagstaff Art Center, a small Italian restaurant with checkered tablecloths that she'd been recommending for 3 months. We split a bottle of Chianti and talked about what came next. She'd been thinking about whether Tucson still made sense for her long term. We talked around that for a while without quite naming it. "Are you happy?" she asked over dessert. I thought about that honestly. Relieved, mostly. For 2 years I kept thinking I was the problem, that if I just adjusted, gave more, found the right angle, Cassie would see what was happening. I set down my fork. You can't make someone choose you. You can only decide how long you'll wait for them to. Them two to cross the table and put her hand over mine. You waited long enough. Passed long enough. We finished the wine. It was a good evening. 3 weeks after the house closed, I got a voicemail from Cassie. Her voice was tired and quieter than usual, stripped of the careful management I'd been hearing for 2 years. "Dad, I know you probably won't call back right away, and that's okay. Dylan and I are separating. He got a job offer in Denver, and he's taking it. We tried counseling twice, and it became clear pretty fast that we wanted different things." A pause. "I also talked to my therapist about a lot of what happened with us. She helped me see some things I hadn't wanted to look at." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know that's small for what happened, but I wanted you to hear me say it." I sat with that voicemail for a full day before I called back. We talked for about 40 minutes. I didn't offer solutions or financial help or any of the reflexive things I might have offered 2 years ago. I listened. She talked about the counseling, about starting to understand the difference between supporting a partner and disappearing into them, about the ways she'd let Dylan's framing of reality replace her own judgment. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask me for anything. At the end of the call, she said, "Are you in Flagstaff?" "For now." "Can I come visit sometime?" "Not soon, if that's not right. Just sometime. Let me settle in. Then yes, sometime." I found a house in Flagstaff in December, a craftsman bungalow on a corner lot, 2 bedrooms, a workshop in the detached garage with good ventilation and a proper electrical panel. $185,000, which felt almost absurdly affordable after Tucson. I paid cash. Irene drove up the weekend I moved in. We arranged furniture, hung pictures, found places for the roll-top desk and the clock my father had left me, and the shelf of engineering reference books I'd been carrying around since graduate school. She made tea and we sat on the porch in November coats and watched the aspens across the street drop the last of their leaves. "You're smiling," she said. "I'm supposed to be." "You weren't always. I know. There's something specific about the feeling of standing inside a space that is entirely yours. Not defensively yours, not mine and not yours, just yours, simply, without anyone else's agenda hanging in the air." I had forgotten that feeling existed. I had forgotten I was entitled to it. I'm not someone who believes in dwelling. The work of the last 2 years is documented in legal records and bank statements, which is where it belongs. What I think about now is simpler. I gave my daughter a home when she needed one. I gave her husband the benefit of every doubt I could reasonably extend. When they made it clear in plain language that what I had built was something they intended to take, I stopped letting them. That's not revenge. That's just reading the load limit and not exceeding it. Cassie drove up in February. We had 2 days together, hiked up to the overlook above town, ate at my brother's favorite diner, spent a Sunday morning at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper the way we used to when she was in college. We didn't resolve everything. Some of it we didn't talk about at all, but I could see her again. The Cassie who had held my hand in that parking garage, who had climbed back on the bike without being asked, who was trying genuinely to figure out who she was without the version Dylan had needed her to be. That was enough for now. Not forgiveness, not resumption, just a possibility of something honest being built. Slowly, on a stronger foundation than what had collapsed. Irene came up that same weekend. She and Cassie met for the first time over dinner at the kitchen table I'd brought from Tucson. They were careful with each other in the way people are when a relationship matters and they don't want to damage it before it starts. By the end of the meal, they were arguing companionably about whether Flagstaff or Sedona had better hiking, which I took as a good sign. After Cassie left, Irene and I sat on the porch in the cold for longer than made practical sense. "That was good," she said. "It was a start. Starts are enough." She was right. The aspens were starting to bud. Just barely. Just the first suggestion of what was coming. The workshop in the garage had 3 projects queued up, including the corner cabinet I'd been planning since October. My brother had suggested a monthly card game with his neighbors, 2 of whom had also worked in construction trades, and there were worse ways to spend a Friday night. I had built a life I recognized. One I'd chosen, deliberately, from the pieces I'd saved, when everything else came down. Dylan sent me an email in March, 4 lines. He was in Denver working in medical device sales. He acknowledged that the way things ended was not ideal. He did not apologize exactly, but he said he understood now that he had expected things he hadn't earned. I read it twice, didn't respond. Not out of anger, I was genuinely beyond anger by then, just because there was nothing useful to add. He understood what he understood. The rest was his to figure out. Some structures hold because every part is doing its job. Some hold because one part is doing all the work. You can only carry that imbalance for so long before either something changes or something fails. I chose to change it. That turned out to be the right call. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and let me know what time it is where you're watching from. I genuinely read them all. For the next story, click the box on the screen. Thank you for being here. I spent 31 years calculating how much weight a structure could bear. That's not a metaphor I'm reaching for. It was literally my job. You look at a bridge, a beam, a foundation, and you figure out the load limit. You build in the tolerance. You don't guess. You measure, document, and plan for what happens when the pressure exceeds what you designed for. What I didn't expect was having to apply that same thinking to my own family. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from watching someone you raised, someone you held together through grief, through loss, through the hardest years, slowly stop seeing you as a person. It doesn't happen all at once. Dylan didn't walk through my door on day 1 and tell me I was an inconvenience. He worked up to it. Small comments, casual dismissals, the steady drip of someone who had decided I was a fixture in his life, rather than a man in my own home. And because Cassie was tired and because I loved her, I absorbed it. I told myself it was manageable. I told myself patience was a virtue. But there's a difference between patience and surrender. I confused the two for almost 2 years. That's on me. The night Dylan sent me that text, "Pack your things, old man," something shifted, not into anger, into clarity. I'd been waiting for a signal I'd already been ignoring for months, and there it was in plain language at 11:42 at night, sitting on my phone while sawdust settled around the workbench. There was nothing left to interpret. The structure had told me exactly how much load it was carrying, and it had failed. What I want people to take from this story isn't the legal moves or the financial decisions, though those mattered. What I want you to understand is the sequence that led to all of it. Dylan and Cassie made specific choices to take without contributing, to dismiss without considering, to treat generosity as a right rather than a gift. Those choices set everything else in motion, not because I was looking for revenge, because choices have weight, they accumulate, and eventually the structure either holds or it doesn't. Integrity is what you do when no one is forcing you to do anything at all. Dylan had every opportunity to be decent. Cassie had every opportunity to see clearly. The fact that it took losing everything for either of them to reckon with that isn't a tragedy. It's just cause and effect, working the way it always does. What I know now, sitting on a porch in Flagstaff watching aspens come back in the spring, is this: I was not wrong to give. I was wrong to give without limit, without condition, without any expectation of basic human respect in return. Generosity without boundaries isn't virtue. It's just a different kind of avoidance. The strength it took to walk out of that house wasn't rage. It was the accumulated weight of finally deciding I was worth protecting. That's something nobody hands you. You have to work up to it, the same way you work up to anything that matters. And when you get there, when you actually choose yourself, clearly and without apology, it turns out there's a life on the other side of it that fits better than anything you were holding on to. That's what Bernard finally figured out. And if you're sitting somewhere recognizing pieces of this story in your own life, maybe that's worth sitting with for a while.